Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to today's episode of Destroying Doubts, where we take your misconceptions and questions about Islam and address them, inshallah. On today's episode, we're defining what are doubts, and we have our guest today, Sheikh Wesam Charkawi. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Sheikh Wesam is from Abu Hanifa Institute in Sydney, and today he'll be assisting us in deconstructing these questions, inshallah.
Inshallah.
To begin, for our listeners, what are doubts?
Look, it's an interesting question. What are doubts? And I think everybody has experienced doubts from time to time. Doubts can come in the form of intrusive thoughts. They could be addressed as questions, sometimes referred to as scruples or waswasa from shaitan, even described by the Prophet ﷺ in one hadith where he even talks about questions that shaitan might come to a person with, such as who created this, who created that, and who created that, until you end up saying who created God, and you should avoid that. So the Prophet even described what intrusive thoughts look like. So they can be thoughts in terms of embodied in images, or you might think of a particular thing or picture a particular image in mind, and that causes some agitation inside oneself, and for many it can also be debilitating. So that's from one aspect. From another aspect, sometimes people can also doubt certain beliefs. This is more on the serious side, but that could be because they don't quite have the knowledge around that particular belief, and hopefully we'll address that today.
Fantastic. And so one of the questions that we found when we were looking, if you do a quick Google search, you'll find that there are a lot of forums and chats about people who have in the past had doubts. And they're one of the things that they're asking is it normal to have doubts? Is this a normal thing?
Well, let me be very straightforward with this. It is quite natural to have doubts. It is very natural. I think it happens to every single human being to doubt. I don't think anybody should actually worry about it at all. And the reason I say that is because it was something that was presented to the Prophet ﷺ in his time. You had some companions come to the Prophet and they said to the Prophet, "O Prophet of Allah, we have these thoughts that come to mind." And in fact, one of the companions, he said, "I would rather be reduced to charcoal than tell you what they are or bring them to my lips."
So a Sahabi was having...
This is what the companion was saying to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet said in a hadith Muslim, he said, "Really, do you get those doubts?" And the man said, "Yes." The companion said, "Yes." And so the Prophet ﷺ responded by saying, "That is a sign of faith." Now, one could ask the question, how is that a sign of faith? It's a question really that seeks clarity. How is that a sign of faith? And the way that is a sign of faith is that that person or that individual loves faith and they want to protect it at all costs. So when these intrusive thoughts, they come, a person feels that angst and agitation. They feel like their most precious thing is under assault. And so instantaneously they get this feeling of dread and they want to protect it no matter what. So when the Prophet ﷺ is saying that is a sign of faith, well, that is a sign of faith because you felt that that thing that you love the most has now been threatened in some way through those intrusive thoughts, which means that you have that faith there and you want to protect it no matter what. It would be a problem that if you got those intrusive thoughts and didn't feel anything at all. So the fact that you're feeling that feeling and you want to protect it and you want to guard it and you want to safekeep it, right? That is a feeling in and of itself of faith. So it's a sign of faith. So if you get those thoughts, you shouldn't really worry about it. Actually, what it is quite the opposite. It's indicative of the sign of faith itself, as the Prophet ﷺ said to that Sahabi. And look how the Prophet comforted him. He said, that's a sign of faith. He didn't tell him, that you should panic about it. He didn't tell him that you should be concerned about it. He didn't tell him that you should lose sleep over it. The Prophet actually said to him, it is a sign of faith. So he actually comforted him, saying it's actually a positive thing that happens to everybody. It's a natural thing. It's going to pass, but it is nonetheless a sign of faith.
Sheikh, so it is normal to have doubts. If I've got really bad doubts, does that take me outside of the fold of Islam? Should I at least be worried about these doubts?
You should not be worried or concerned at all. And the reason why I say this, and in fact scholars say this, is because It doesn't take you out of the fold of Islam at all. It doesn't remove you from the fold of Islam. It doesn't mean that you've left Islam. And it doesn't even mean that your Islam or your faith is in doubt. And let me explain. An image of something. So you've got an image that's cast into your mind that's making people think that they've left the fold of Islam. So there's this portrayed image in mind. But in actual reality, an image of something does not indicate truth. It does not reflect truth. It's like, for example, someone having a dream. And in that dream, they can't move, they can't run, or they need to make wudu, and they find themselves in prayer, and they see this image in a dream, only to wake up and find out the reality is it's not the case.
Yes.
So an image of something does not reflect reality. So if a person is receiving this image that I am out of the fold of Islam, it doesn't actually reflect the state of my true faith, which is I have faith. That's what the Prophet was saying, alayhi salatu wasalam. That is faith. The image as though you don't have faith is not even a problem. You shouldn't even be worried about it because it's not reality. It's not truth. So an image of something does not reflect reality. You shouldn't be worried about it. You shouldn't be perturbed about it. And I think this is a fundamental point, that people are getting these intrusive thoughts that cause such agitation. And for some, believe me, it's debilitating. I've come across people that can't sleep. I've come across people that can't, they say, I can't stop thinking about it. I'm worried about it. Some people are anxious about it. They have nightmares about it. And I come to them and I say, look, very natural. You shouldn't even be worried about it in actual reality, because what it is first, it's a display of faith, but also it's only an image of something which doesn't remove faith. So if you have these thoughts, you haven't left the fold of Islam. If you have these thoughts, you're still embedded deeply into the faith. And in fact, as we said, as the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, is quite clearly a statement of faith.
Fantastic. So I think sometimes these things might be easier said than done. So in saying that, a person that is feeling these doubts or is going through doubts, although after hearing this, they might understand, well, it doesn't take me outside the fold, but it's still bothering me. And because they have a strong sense of Islam or connection to the deen, it's not something they want to continue having. So how should a person actually deal with this?
Look, I suppose another thing I want to say about this is, of course, it may cause a bother to some people to have these doubts to begin with, and that is quite understandable. But look at it from this way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constructed us in a certain way. And He constructed us in a certain way that these scruples were allowed to come to pass over us, that we were going to be subjected to them. If I could stop them, if you could stop them, if we could all stop them, we would. We would simply, press that switch and all of a sudden we turn them off. But it's not the case. And Allah, through His infinite wisdom, He allowed them to happen. And we know that whatever, comes to mind, you're not punished over it. You're not held accountable for it. It's not a statement of where your faith is at in any way, shape or form. So I understand, yes, it does cause agitation. If you could switch them off, you would. But remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all merciful. And He knows that I'm contending with these issues. And He knows that I'm in this predicament. But I should be rested and feel assured that the fact that I'm feeling agitated and the fact that I'm feeling concerned is because I want to care about what I love the most. And I will protect it at all costs. It's the very reason I'm agitated to begin with. So you need to start thinking in terms of those thoughts and allow those to dominate one's mind to bring some form of alleviation to mind.
So Sheikh, let's make a distinction now then. What we've been talking about up until this point has been intrusive thoughts. And you made a point at the beginning about belief, and that belief, having doubts about belief may be problematic. So at what point do doubts about belief become problematic?
I think it's important to make a distinction between what we're talking about in terms of intrusive thoughts and when that can start to enter a particular sphere that might become problematic. Make no mistake about it, that what we're talking about here is that a person has that faith, is grounded in faith, and then is subject to scruples or subject to waswasa or intrusive thoughts, and that they cause that agitation. This can become problematic if a person seriously begins to ask the question to say, does God actually exist, for example, and has doubt in that. So it's not merely a thought anymore. It's actually serious consideration. They start to go down the line of whereby they say, well, there's arguments that, for example, go to establishing that God may not exist. Once a person starts to enter that territory, well, then you need to seek out a scholar immediately. You need to start asking the questions now. They're no longer intrusive thoughts. You're entering terrain where you need to have answers provided. Or you could enter territory to say, for example, if God existed, for example, if God really existed, then I wouldn't have suffered, this particular disease. Or if God really existed, then my child wouldn't have gone through, all those hardships that I saw my child go through. When you start to seriously question, as opposed to mere intrusive thoughts, you need to seek out a scholar immediately. You need to seek clarification immediately, because what you've started to do is to voice some very serious, if you like, notions that you need to be grounded in. And so they require conviction, that you need to be trusting God. You need to be relying on God. That you need to be firmly established in faith. Yes. If I'm firmly established in faith, and if from time to time Shaitan wants to come and cast the notion, does he exist or does he not exist? Well, I know absolutely within me that he does. That thought, I pay no attention to it. And it's quite natural for Shaitan to come along and cast that thought into my mind. But I know what I'm standing on, which is a very solid ground. But once that solid ground becomes shaky and there are serious questions that you begin asking, you need to seek out a scholar to clarify and provide that clarity.
So great feedback, Sheikh. So in saying that, first step would be seek a scholar when it gets to that point where you feel like it is actually questioning your faith. If someone doesn't have access to a local scholar, or that maybe they're not necessarily in touch with anyone locally, what other alternatives can they pursue?
Well, the remedy for doubts, wherever it may be, whether it's just intrusive thoughts or it becomes something more sinister and serious, the remedy, first and foremost, I say for anybody, is to seek out knowledge. Knowledge is very, very important. Knowledge really, it provides the antidote to those things that otherwise you can't reconcile. Yes. Someone asks the question, can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift, for example? Yes. If I have the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has power over all things, and that rock is a thing, so therefore God has power over it. So the way you're asking the question doesn't make sense. So God has power over all things, and that's absolute, no matter how you construct a question that is fallacious. So knowledge is very important. It tells us about who Allah Azza wa Jal is. And so by knowing who Allah is, affirming who Allah is, learning about the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, why he did certain things, we stand on ground that is firm. We stand on a solid footing. And so when those thoughts come to pass, we're able to quickly cast them out of our minds through the knowledge that we have. That's number one. Number two is contribution. And what I mean contribution, I mean to stay engaged, and which is contribution in and of itself. See, the formula that works is not just one whereby you say, I'm abstaining from haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just create us to abstain from haram, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to stay away from haram, but also to contribute and enact what he has commanded us to do. Yes. So you need to stay engaged. It's not enough for a person to say, I'm not approaching, the unlawful things that God has told me to stay away from. We often also hear this from young people today. They say, I'm not doing anything unlawful, thereby that justifies what I'm doing. Well, that's a formula for destruction. That's a formula for failure. A formula for failure is when you believe I'm just abstaining and that is enough. No, it must be a formula for abstention plus action. So stay engaged. If I don't contribute to a relationship with Allah, I end up losing myself. If I don't end up contributing to a relationship with my wife, we end up drifting apart. Yes. If I don't contribute to a relationship with my children, we end up finding that relationship on shaky ground sooner rather than later. So contribution is very important, and that is part of a successful formula. So you need to be able to contribute. If you don't contribute, you're going to find that you're just mulling over these thoughts 24 hours a day. Yes. The last thing I would say is hidayah, Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open the hearts. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance. Ultimately, I could give you any argument, and any scholar could give you any proof or evidence, but if Allah does not open that heart, it will never open. Consider the truth or the events of two boys. One boy sat in the lap of a prophet, but was not guided and ended up disbelieving. And one boy sat in the lap of a tyrant in Fir'aun, but was destined to be a prophet. So think about that for a moment, that guidance is in the hand of Allah. Guidance is a gift from Allah Azza wa Jal. So don't stop asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep asking Allah, Ya Allah, you are the one who alters the hearts. Open my heart, guide it to truth, guide it to haqq. So knowledge, a sufficient amount of knowledge. Not that everybody needs to become a scholar, but a sufficient amount of knowledge. Stay engaged in deen and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance. And these are three key solutions to basically keeping the doubt at bay.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. Last point I want to actually bring up, because I feel like Muslims today in this day and age often fall into the trap of these online debates and online forums, where people might see a clickbait article that pops up about the universe created itself, there was no need for a God debunked. You get all these clickbait headlines these days. You go in there and you start watching, listening, reading, and then you end up in this rabbit hole of unlimited back and forth between people who are disbelieving or trying to disprove Islam or religion in general. And then a person who might not have so much knowledge starts to engage in this, only to realize that there are a lot of questions they don't have answers to.
Yes.
They might think that's because of the faith, but in fact it's probably based on where they're at, that they don't necessarily haven't been exposed to that or don't know how to answer these questions. So I bring this up because one source of doubt is from the shaitan, and shaitan has his allies, and sometimes there are people who are actively trying to bring Muslims away from the deen. I say Muslims because there are people out there who are actively targeting young Muslims and trying to take them away from the faith. In saying that, how should young people that come across these things, how should they act, engage? Just to be observant of their own selves and be aware. How should they act in a way to make sure that they don't fall down these rabbit holes?
I think that's a very important question. And you're talking about exposure. And I would certainly warn anyone from exposing themselves to particular arguments and debates that they're not equipped yet with. For example, I constantly see people going to university, Muslims going to university, studying philosophy without being grounded in their faith or the tenets of their faith at all. In other words, they know nothing about their beliefs, and yet they go into university and they study philosophy. And I think that that's problematic. And it's problematic because that might now fill the void that you've evaded maybe your whole life. And once that's filled, that becomes your worldview. And if philosophy becomes your worldview as opposed to your faith, well, you're going to start seeing the world through the prism of philosophy as opposed to the tenets of Islamic faith. It's the same online. If you go online and you start watching these atheist warriors and advocates talking about atheism and giving the arguments, well, you're not equipped yet to be able to debunk them, and yet you're exposing yourself to such arguments. What I would say is desist and don't go down that path of getting yourself into a predicament where you need answers to what you've put yourself into. You put yourself in that predicament. Don't go down that path yet. Hold on. When we were talking about before, which is one of the key ingredients, is to increase your knowledge. Learn about Islam. Learn about the tenets of your faith. Learn about the beliefs of Islam first and foremost. And once you feel that you're in a sufficient area, then I would say seek guidance from others about what the best things out there are to watch. So you can get a gauge, if you like, for where you should be or what you should be accessing in order to increase your knowledge. And there are many, many sites out there nowadays where you can get online, you can watch, and you can benefit without going down that, if you like, that rabbit hole, which ends up leading to a point whereby it puts you in a predicament where, you know, you're very much agitated, you're distraught, or you're anxious because you don't know how to provide an answer to what you've exposed yourself to. So I would say be careful, be cautious, seek out those people who know first and foremost, learn your deen before you expose yourself to whatever is out there. And I would say any university student, this is my advice to any university student studying any secular degree, I would just advise normally, you know, if you can access a quick 1 month, 2 month, 6 month course with your local masjid, with some scholar who's teaching, a weekly lesson on Aqidah. I would say engage that. Engage that before you go to university, because nowadays what we find ourselves in, and the situation the world finds itself in, is in a situation whereby God is being removed from the equation. God is being removed from everything. Yes. And so people want to do things without God. People want to remove God from all their actions, from all their events. And people are effectively saying, God has nothing to do with what we're doing. And that seems to be the order of the day today, especially when you first start out at university. So just be a little bit careful, seek out somebody, do a quick course before you go to uni, or learn by either through accessing some of those known websites that we know, or through a scholar, those arguments before you venture out to university or want to engage watching some of that content online.
Fantastic.
Allah knows best.
Allah knows best. And there's a rich tradition in Islam, obviously, of engaging in these fields. So no one's saying desist, but people are saying the advice you're giving, Sheikh, is first inform yourself. And there's a lot of tradition with great ulama of the past who engaged in the sciences, various humanities studies, philosophy. They went down that path, but they already had strong foundations and they've contributed to it. For example, philosophy, where it is today, a lot was taken from Islam, or a lot of ideas were influenced by Islam, for example, science and other fields as well. So Islam has a rich tradition. It's not saying don't engage. What we're saying is first inform yourself, educate yourself, and then go forward. Inshallah.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Jazakallah khair for your time today, Sheikh. That's all for today's episode. If you have a chance, please subscribe, comment, share with your friends if you found it beneficial. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
If you enjoyed this video and everything else that OnePath does and would like to see us produce more content, then please support us. Go to www.onepathnetwork.com. You can support us from as little as $1 a day. Much love and appreciation, and may Allah bless you all.